Usually when we talk about human innovation, we think of it as this relentless march toward visibility.
Right.
Like we build taller skyscrapers so they can be seen from miles away. We invent brighter, larger
Yeah,
screens.
we want our technology to be obvious.
Exactly. We want it to be this glaring, monumental presence in our lives. But then you look at one of the most transformative materials in all of human history, and its ultimate goal, I mean, the absolute pinnacle of its perfection, is to be entirely invisible.
To literally disappear.
Right, so you can look right through it. I'm
Oh, yeah.
talking, of course, about glass.
It is the absolute definition of a material hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
I mean, we are quite literally surrounded by it right now.
Yeah, windows, screens, everything.
Fiber optic cables pulsing with data right beneath our feet. And yet, if the glass is doing its job perfectly, we look right past it. We don't even register its existence.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're bringing you, the learner, on a comprehensive pedagogical journey through a collection of ancient artifacts.
Specifically, we're looking at the insights from ancient glass, a guide to the Yale collection by R.A. Grossman.
And I gotta say, this source material completely shattered my understanding of the ancient world because, we tend to think of ancient history as this era of heavy stone, rough wood, baked mud.
But our mission today is to track how one material, glass, triggered an absolute technological arms race.
Yeah, we're gonna explore how it evolved from this incredibly rare elite substitute for precious stones into a mass-produced everyday household material.
And ultimately how it gave the ancient Romans actual see-through windows.
It's wild. Okay, let's unpack this because to really grasp it, we have to treat this like a masterclass.
Right, we're going to move chapter by chapter through the technological eras of ancient glassmaking.
So chapter 1, the origins and the core forming technique. What is the big idea here?
The big idea is that early glass began in the 3rd millennium BC, not as hollow vessels, but as a solid, less expensive substitute for rare precious stones before evolving into the first core-formed containers.
Okay, so let's get into the advanced deep dive for this chapter. Because when I think of glass, I think of a cup or a bowl. But originally, it was essentially a fake rock.
That is exactly what it was. And what's fascinating here is the sheer chemical alchemy behind its invention.
Yeah.
We have to travel back to Mesopotamia, roughly 5,000 years ago. Craftsmen there were experimenting, and they realized that if they took 3 very specific, seemingly unrelated primary ingredients and melted them together at extreme temperatures, they got something entirely new.
And those ingredients are sand and alkali and lime, right?
Sick.
But how does someone even figure that out? I mean, sand just sits on the beach. You put it in a fire and nothing happens.
Right, because pure sand, which gives you that basic silicon dioxide structure, melts at an incredibly high temperature, around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Yeah, and ancient wood-fired kilns could not easily reach or sustain that,
Yeah.
so they needed a chemical hack. Exactly. They introduced an alkali oxide, often from plant ashes or a mineral salt like natron. This acts as a flux. It chemically interacts with the sand and drastically lowers its melting point.
Down to something an ancient furnace could actually handle. But what about the lime?
Well, if you only melt sand and an alkali together, you get glass, but it's water-soluble.
Wait, really?
Yeah, if you made a cup out of just sand and alkali and poured water into it, it would eventually dissolve into a sticky puddle,
That is a terrible cup.
a catastrophic cup.
Mm-hmm.
So they added lime calcium oxide, which acts as a stabilizer. It locks the chemical structure into place.
So sand, alkali, lime, a brilliant recipe. But they weren't making cups yet.
No, they used this to glaze jewelry and small beads, alongside materials like faience.
Because they were basically trying to print money, right? Counterfeiting lapis lazuli.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True lapis lazuli was mined in places like modern-day Afghanistan. It was exorbitantly expensive. So by adding metallic minerals like cobalt or copper to the glass melt, they could turn it a brilliant, opaque blue.
A fake gem for the ultra-elite. But this industry doesn't stay in Mesopotamia. It shifts to Egypt in a really dark way.
Yeah, the historical evidence suggests the Egyptians learned high-level glassmaking via Asiatic captives.
Prisoners of war.
Right. Taken during the military campaigns of Pharaoh Thutmose III around 14...
He steals this amazing fake lapis, and instead of just stealing the jewelry, he steals the glassmakers.
Because in the ancient world, the patent was literally the living human being.
You had to physically kidnap the tech sector.
Pretty much. And Egypt was the perfect incubator. They had endless sand, huge deposits of natron, The industry exploded.
Which leads us to some early masterpieces in the Yale collection, like the vulture head inlay.
Right, from around 1400 to 1350 BC.
It's made of 3 differently colored opaque pieces, blue, yellow, and red. And it represents the goddess Nekbet, so a royal commission.
And you have to remember this was carved. They made a solid block of glass and shipped it down, just like a real stone.
Like the Amarna princess amulet, too. Dark blue glass, carved face, and that distinct elongated skull from the 14th century BC.
Beautiful, but still just artificial rocks. Eventually, humans wanted containers to hold liquids.
But they didn't have the blowpipe yet, so how do we get to a hollow vessel?
By the late 16th century BC, they innovated the core forming technique.
And reading about this made my wrists ache. Tell us about this process.
It is the absolute antithesis of modern glass blowing. The artisan takes a mixture of mud, sand, and organic material like animal dung and shapes it onto a metal rod.
They sculpt a mud ball into the exact interior shape of the vessel they want.
Right, that's the core. They let it dry, and then they take hot molten glass and literally trail it around this mud core.
Wrapping molten honey around a stick of dried mud, that sounds so imprecise.
It was. Or they would fuse crushed glass to it. Then they would decorate it by applying thin strands of hot-colored glass yellows, whites, and dragging a tool through them to make zigzag or festoon patterns.
But then it's all bumpy.
Which is why they do marvering. They take the rod and roll the hot glass firmly over a flat stone.
So they roll it out like dough to smooth it and press the pattern in?
Exactly. And then, crucially, annealing. Slow cooling in a special oven to prevent the glass from shattering from thermal shock.
But then you have a beautiful glass bottle, completely filled with rock-hard baked mud and dung.
Yep. So they had to sit there and physically scrape all of that out through the tiny neck of the bottle.
I cannot imagine the sheer tedium of scraping mud out of a tiny perfume bottle for hours.
It was incredibly laborious, which is why these vessels were strictly small for high-end cosmetics or perfumed oils.
Like the amphoriscos in the collection. A miniature Greek amphora from the 6th to 4th centuries BC.
Right, reflecting changing patron taste. They wanted glass that looked like Greek pottery.
Okay, so let's give the listener the connective tissue here. Chapter 1 establishes the baseline. Glass was a slow, laborious, elite commodity, and this limitation inherently created a demand for a faster method, setting the stage for casting. So for our practical recap, bullet 1, glass was originally invented as a counterfeit material for precious gems. Bullet 2, early hollow vessels required a physical mud core that had to be scraped out. Bullet 3, early glass was exclusively used for tiny, high-end cosmetic containers.
That sums up.
And for you listening, here is your critical thinking challenge for Chapter 1. First, how does the transplantation of glassmaking via prisoners of war change our understanding of ancient intellectual property? And second, if you were a merchant in 1400 BC, how would you market a fake material to royalty as a luxury good?
Good questions to mull over.
All right, Chapter 2, the shift to casting in mosaic glass. What's the big idea?
The big idea is that to meet expanding Hellenistic demands for luxury goods, artisans popularized casting techniques, primarily mosaic glass, to create wider patterned vessels that core forming couldn't achieve.
So let's dive into the advanced deep dive, the Hellenistic boom. What triggered this shift?
Alexander the Great. When he died, his successors carved up his empire, creating these wealthy new kingdoms. And they generated a massive demand for luxury goods.
They were throwing massive banquets to show off, and a tiny mudcore perfume bottle doesn't really scream, "I am a powerful king."
No, they needed wide bowls, huge plates. So by the 1st century AD, core forming became entirely obsolete. Casting took over.
And there were 3 types of molds, right?
Yeah. Single or open molds, which are just a bowl shape carved into stone. Multi-part or closed molds for complex shapes. And former molds, where you slump or sag a flat disc of hot glass over a dome shape.
And this leads to mosaic glass construction. When I was reading this, it sounded exactly like making slice and bake cookies, but with molten glass at thousands of degrees.
That is a perfect analogy, actually. They would create these canes-long, slender rods of layered polychrome glass.
So they have a hot cylinder of layered colors, and they physically stretch it out into a long, thin rod.
Right. And as it stretches, the internal pattern shrinks, but retains its exact proportion.
Like rock candy.
Then they slice it into sections, like a roll of coins.
Mhm.
And they arrange those slices into a mold, heat them until they fuse, and sag them over a former mold.
It's unbelievable. And the Yale hemispherical bowl perfectly shows this. It's from the late 2nd to 1st century BC. It has these yellow spiral pattern canes on a clear ground, mixed with randomly placed chunks of blue, green, white, and purple glass.
Capped by a dark blue and white striped rim. It would have looked mesmerizing in the firelight of a royal banquet.
But the supply chain for this must have been insane.
It was a massive assembly line. Furnace workers, cane makers, slicers, mold arrangers, and polishers.
Which gives us our connective tissue. While casting allowed for larger bowls, it still required prefabricating canes. The industry was begging for a true paradigm shift for speed.
Right.
So, practical recap for Chapter 2. 1. Casting allowed glass makers to move from tiny tubes to wide bowls. 2. Mosaic glass relied on prefabricating complex canes for repeatable patterns. 3. Alexander the Great's successors created the first massive consumer market for luxury glass.
Spot on.
And your critical thinking challenge for Chapter 2. First, consider the supply chain. How does manufacturing pre-made canes alter the division of labor compared to core forming? And second, why do you think complex, multicolored mosaic patterns appealed specifically to Hellenistic royal courts?
It really makes you think about conspicuous consumption.
Definitely. Okay, moving to Chapter 3, the glass-blowing revolution and early experimentation. Big idea time.
The big idea is that the invention of the blowpipe in the late 1st century BC stands as the most sweeping innovation in glass history, democratizing the material by allowing instant mass-produced shapes.
Let's do the advanced deep dive, the blowpipe. This is just a staggering leap in physics.
It is a hollow metal tube. You gather a gob of molten glass on the end, and by blowing human breath through the tube, the air pressure inflates the gob from the inside.
And the manual techniques they used in the 1st century BC are virtually identical to modern glassblowing today, right?
Exactly. They inflate it, swing it to elongate it, marver on a stone, use tools to pinch the neck, blow it to full size, and snap it off into the annealing oven.
Taking a luxury good and instantly dropping the price. It made glass a standard household material across the Roman era. It basically turned it into ancient Tupperware.
Tupperware is the perfect word for it. It was everywhere.
Let's look at 3 Yale pieces that show this form and function. First, the tall, slender flask for perfume.
Right, amber glass with white festoons. The long neck restricts the flow of expensive oil.
Then there's the small, conical blue bottle, wide base so it doesn't tip over on a vanity table.
And then the bulbous cerebelos, an oil flag with a bronze handle.
I love that one. A heavy metal handle and a cheap glass bottle, just so you can carry it on your wrist to the public baths. Early ergonomic design.
Exactly. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at these in a museum, they often have this stunning rainbow iridescence or a white chalky layer.
Yeah. I always thought the Romans were just geniuses at holographic iridescent decoration.
It's a massive misconception. That beautiful iridescence is actually environmental damage.
Wait, really? It's decay.
Yes, the weathering phenomenon. Over 2,000 years in the damp earth, the alkaline components leach out, leaving incredibly thin, fragile layers of pure silica.
And those layers separate and act like a prism.
Exactly. So we have to imagine ancient glass as clear and utilitarian, completely stripping away the modern museum aesthetic.
Mind blown. But they did still do some coloring, right? Like color band and splashed glass.
Yeah, early blowing experiments to mimic mosaics, they'd apply white or green threads to a partially inflated gob, and as it expanded, it created a marbled look.
A quick manufacturing hack for a luxury look, which is our connective tissue. Once blowing made basic items cheap, elite artisans had to figure out how to merge speed with high-end luxury decoration. Okay, practical recap for Chapter 3. 1. Glass blowing turned a rare luxury into the ancient equivalent of Tupperware. 2. The manual techniques from the 1st century BC are virtually identical today. 3. Museum glass iridescence is beautiful, but it's actually chemical decay.
Nailed it.
And your critical thinking challenge. 1. Name a modern technology that shifted from an elite status symbol to a cheap, everyday necessity in a single generation. How does that compare? 2. How does the Arballos demonstrate early ergonomic design?
It's all about the user experience.
Right. So Chapter 4, advanced artistry, mold blowing, cutting, and trailing. Big idea.
The big idea: to capture the high-end market, specialist artisans combine blowing with inklex holds, cutting wheels, and trailing to create intricately textured masterpieces.
Advanced deep dive. Let's start with mold blowing.
It's the marriage of blowing and casting. You inflate the hot gob inside a multi-part mold, which stamps relief imagery directly into the glass efficiently.
Instant intricate shapes. Then there's cut glass. And this process separates the labor, doesn't it?
Yes, blowers would make thick, undecorated blanks. Once annealed, specialist gem cutters used lathes and abrasive wheels to carve facets.
Like the Yale facet cut beaker with the honeycomb pattern. But what's wild is that they used chemical decolorants, manganese and antimony, to bleach the natural green iron impurities out of the sand.
They wanted to imitate highly expensive rock crystal.
Faking it again. I love it. We also have painted and gilded glass.
Painted is rare due to pigment decay, but gilding survived. Like the 3rd or 4th century purple beaker with gold leaf scraped into rosettes.
And that one has the Greek inscription panosesi scraped into it. Drink that you may live.
And there's debate about this, right?
Yeah, some argue it's an early Christian Eucharistic meaning, but the text leans toward it being generic, since the other imagery is traditional Roman, just a lavish toast.
And finally, trail decoration. Applying hot glass strands. In the 4th and 5th centuries, this gets completely out of hand. The decoration starts to obscure the form.
Like the jar with 16 cage-like handles. But the most absurd piece is the 4-compartment cosmetic tube for Galena eye makeup. It has this massive triple-looped handle that actually physically blocks the openings. It makes it incredibly difficult to use a bone spoon to get the makeup out. Why would consumers tolerate that?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, status symbols often inherently require sacrificing convenience to prove wealth. You're showing you don't need a purely functional tool.
It's a runway dress you can't sit in, which leads to our connective tissue. As decoration became more specific, it allowed workshops to develop signature styles, setting the foundation for branding.
Exactly.
Practical recap for Chapter 4. 1. Artisans use manganese and antimony to bleach glass to fake rock crystal. 2. Gold glass was created by applying gold leaf and scratching away the negative space. 3. Late Roman trailed glass proves that prioritizing extreme aesthetics over functionality is not a modern trend. Critical thinking challenge for you listening. 1. Why would ancient consumers tolerate a cosmetic container that was frustrating to use? 2. How does the use of chemical decolorants mirror modern industries producing synthetic diamonds or artificial flavors?
Human psychology hasn't changed much.
Not at all. Okay, Chapter 5. Trade, marketing, and ancient brands. Big idea.
The big idea is that the unified Roman Empire created a massive free trade zone where competitive glassmakers utilized maker's marks, geographical branding, and highly targeted merchandising.
Let's dive in. Targeted merchandising. The early Byzantine Jerusalem workshop from the 5th to 7th centuries AD.
They made cheap, mold-blown hexagonal jugs as souvenirs for holy oil.
And they used impressed decoration, not raised. But the genius part is how they targeted demographics with the exact same vessel shape.
Right, some had Christian crosses, some had Jewish menorahs, and some had generic geometric shapes.
So what does this all mean? They were just swapping out symbols to capture all the tourist dollars from every pilgrim.
It's the ultimate tourist trap model.
It really is. Now let's talk about master craftsmen. Enyin, active in the early to mid-1st century AD.
He signed his mold-blown jars. A no razon, Enyin made it.
A designer brand logo, but his location is debated, right? Sidon or Italy?
Yes. His name is Eastern, but most of his cups are found in the West. Did he export heavily or move his workshop? We don't know for sure. But his fame inspired massive knockoffs across the empire.
People copying his complex style but leaving off the signature, and then there are the anonymous brands. Archaeologists identify them by manufacturing quirks.
Like the workshop of the floating handles. They attached the handle at the rim, dragged it down, and inexplicably left it unattached at the base.
Just floating there, a perfect forensic fingerprint. And this workshop produced a head flask that sparks the Livia controversy.
Yes, the flask has the nodus coiffure, the signature hairstyle of Empress Livia, Augustus's wife.
So is it her?
The debate is fierce. Modeling glass on specific historical figures is otherwise unknown. It might just be a generic woman sporting the trendy haircut of the day.
And we also see regional styles, like Western workshops in Colonia Agrippinensis Cologne, with specific chain handles and bell-shaped cups.
Which perfectly sets up our connective tissue. The sheer volume of trade and regional styles are what allow modern archaeologists to piece this history together.
Practical recap for Chapter 5. 1. Ancient souvenir shops in Jerusalem swapped out religious symbols on identical bottles for different pilgrim demographics. 2. Aignan was the ancient luxury designer brand, complete with counterfeits. 3. Scholars identify ancient workshops forensically, tracking quirks like a floating handle.
Excellent summer.
Critical thinking challenge. 1. If you were Aignan, how would you protect your brand across the Roman Empire? 2. Does the mass production of religious souvenirs diminish their cultural value or enhance their historical significance?
That's a great one to debate.
Okay, final chapter. Chapter 6. Unearthing the past Yale's archaeology at Dura Europos. Big idea.
The big idea is that without controlled archaeological context, the history of glass is guesswork. Sites like Dura Europos provide the critical time capsules needed to map this history.
Advanced deep dive, the value of provenance.
Right. Knowing where glass was found is as important as the object itself. Unprovenanced art just tells us how it was made. Excavated art tells us when and where it was used.
And Yale excavated Dura Europos in modern Syria from 1928 to 1937. What makes this site so special?
It was sacked by the Sasanians around AD 256.
So the destruction acts as a perfect time capsule. It locks the glass finds strictly to the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD.
Exactly. They found the fragment of the painted Thetis face, local cut glass fragments, and most surprisingly, a large number of flat glass fragments.
Wait, flat glass. You're telling me they had glass windows?
They did. Used to glaze the windows of ancient buildings.
My mind is officially blown. I always picture the ancient world as dark, drafty stone rooms with animal skins over the holes.
This raises an important question about what other modern conveniences we incorrectly assume the ancients lacked. They were sophisticated engineers.
That completely changes my mental image of a Roman building. Sunlight streaming through an actual window pane.
Amazing. And we only know that because of careful archaeology.
Which is our connective tissue. Everything we've learned is owed to the meticulous work of unearthing these sites.
Precisely.
Practical recap for Chapter 6. 1. Unprovenanced art tells us how it was made. Excavated art tells us when and where. 2. The violent sack of Dura Europos accidentally preserved a perfect archaeological time capsule. 3. The Romans didn't just use glass for drinking, they had flat glass window panes in the 3rd century.
Perfect.
Critical thinking challenge. 1. How does the destruction of a city act as a paradoxical gift to historians? 2. How does the discovery of ancient glass windows change your mental image of the ancient Roman world?
It really reframes everything.
It does. So to wrap this all up, we have journeyed from fake lapis lazuli in Mesopotamia through the grueling mud cores, the Hellenistic mosaic bowls, the absolute revolution of the blowpipe democratizing glass, all the way to Aignan's branded empires and the actual window panes of Dura Europos.
It is an immense journey.
Oh.
But I want to leave the listener with a final provocative thought from the text.
Oh, please do.
After the turmoil of late antiquity, the political division between the East and West was perfectly mirrored by the emergence of two completely separate glassmaking traditions.
Because the Roman free trade zone collapsed.
Exactly. In the East, utilizing natron, you get the foundation of the spectacular Islamic glass tradition. But in the West, cut off from those raw materials, they had to use forest ashes, birthing the heavy, dark green Frankish tradition.
So the politics literally dictated the chemical recipes and the art.
Yes. So think about the technology you use today. How much of our global tech development, from software to hardware, is quietly being shaped and split by invisible geopolitical fault lines?
Wow.
Just waiting for a future archaeologist to dig up our glass, our servers, our phones, and read the politics embedded in it.
That is a brilliant thought to end on. From a fake gem made of sand to a perfect mirror of our own geopolitics. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, everyone.